From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Hi, welcome to the show. Today we're going to try something never before attempted on Chicago Newsroom, a sports analogy. We don't do them here because, they're best left to the professionals, but Monday night's debate inspired this thought. What if your team, now bear with me on this, what if your team was rested in practice and it took to the field only to find out that your opponents kept changing their uniforms? The quarterback, is this what they do? They ready a pass, right? And they find that everybody on the opposite team is suddenly wearing your team's jerseys and numbers. Is that confusing, kind of messing with your playbook? Well, that's what it felt like to me with Team Romney doing. That's what they were doing the other night. Suddenly they're all agreeing with Obama's foreign policy and denying much of what his campaign had been saying, publicly and on the record, for about a year or more. Now, Eric Zorn pointed out that, he and others actually have pointed out that it was just kind of downright McGovern-esque on Monday, calling for peace and world without war on Romney's part. So do we have a new Romney to deal with? So we'll go to the source of that because Eric happens to be joining us today. Eric, how you doing? Eric Zorn, Chicago Tribune. Change the subject, columnist, editorial. You know that he's been on the show so much, you know that already. And for the first time, Kyra's joining us. Kyra Kyles from Jet Magazine. Kyra, really glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So, we normally deal with local stuff on the program here, but we consider Obama to be local news because he's from right down the street. So, what is the latest here today? We're looking at some new explosions that have happened with the senator in Indiana, the senator candidate in Indiana. Will that affect things? And are you seeing numbers changing, Eric? What are you?
Well, let me ready this pass for you, Ken.
Was my analogy okay? Did it work? No,
actually, it was not.
I spent a lot of time on that.
Well, maybe when we actually do this instead of in rehearsal.
Right.
The better analogy that I heard from Monday night was this. These were like two. Romney was like a boxer in a clinch, and this is something that boxers do toward the end of a fight when they're really tired. Is they just get up close to their opponent and they basically end up sort of hugging him to stay, so they don't get hit. And the fight that the bout then goes to the end and they're declared the winner. And that's that was the best sporting analogy that I could come up with. So boxing,
it works for me.
But what we're seeing today, the polls are clearly very tight. Obama seems to have a pretty good cushion. A couple percentage points in Ohio and some of the other swing states that he's going to have to win. That if he wins, he's got a path to election. I don't know. These polls are based on calling people at home, and elections are based on getting people out of their homes to the polls and getting those people to do that. Democrats have been good at that in the past. The reports are that Obama's got a better ground game than Romney. I think, completely anecdotally, that there's more enthusiasm among Republicans to fire Obama than there is enthusiasm among Democrats to rehire him, and that's
But I don't know. Back me up on this. Doesn't this work for Obama a lot better among those people? Millenniums and all those folks who are just kind of like going to sit this one out, that all of a sudden it looks so incredibly important that maybe my vote counts. Doesn't that do something?
Personally, I do think that younger people like having an impact or feeling that what they're going to do is going to make a strong statement. The fact that it's this close, though, at this late date, does speak to Eric's point. Like, if by now it's still this tight, you just have to wonder what's going on. But I have a different analogy, maybe an educational analogy to offer. I felt like Romney came off as someone who had studied exactly half of a book for a test and had come to class and was just praying that no questions from the other half of the book would be asked.
Praying no geography questions.
Right, because I found it to be a very tight, kind of a repetitive response pattern. And he just seemed like he was just trying to get by. Like, maybe if the bell rings before I'm asked anything really big, I can at least go out neutral rather than better. Yeah. So I kind of got a sense of giving up. And I also noticed there was some sweat, some mist coming up.
I always enjoy, after these things, I love to watch Fox, because that's how you find out what's fair and balanced and what's really going on. And Fox was, of course, saying that Romney had won a stunning victory, but that it was just amazing that Obama was able to also get some punches in tonight.
They also said he looked very presidential, which you know is extremely important to take on the look of a Marvel comic president. So.
The instant polls and I think just the common sense viewer would tell you that Obama won the last two debates. Romney won the first one, and that Romney won the war of the debates. Put them all three together. Romney won because he won so decisively.
Because he's still alive.
Well, he won so decisively in that first debate. That first debate changed the direction of the campaign. It changed basically everything. I'm convinced that many books will be written about that one debate.
I think
going
you're
forward,
right.
even if Obama wins.
History.
It was definitely a tepid performance, but I have to say that unfortunately it seems like some voters are drawn to zingers, and the horses and bayonet zinger of the evening, where he basically likened Romney's foreign policy understanding to something, from the 50s.
World War I.
I think that really also struck a note, and I think he also did a really good job of showing how Romney has flip-flopped back and forth on different issues, and bringing about that issue of trust, and can you trust this individual? Because he made that famous Etch-a-Sketch comment, and I think that resonated with people. So I do agree, he demolished Obama in the first debate, but I think that Obama's comeback in the second and third certainly leveled the playing field, and I still give the edge to Obama in the way he came off in general as a clear, decisive leader.
Yeah, my favorite zinger of the night was when he said, it related to what Kyra was talking about, where he said you have the foreign policy of the 80s, the social policy of the 50s, and the economic policy of the 1920s. All of those things are, I think, points to ponder for voters, and particularly the social policy of the 1950s. And this is something that I've been sort of thinking about as I think about Romney. He seems like a dad in a TV show when I was a little kid.
Leave It to Beaver,
yeah, exactly. And there's that sense of that's the kind of America that he would like us to go back.
That mythical
like
America that never existed.
America,
the binders of women.
That was
line.
awful.
But what actually was interesting about that was when he sort of followed it up. I mean, the binders was a funny image, but then he's talking about women need to get home and make dinner. I mean, I just think that is sort of part of who he is, and so I think that he in his heart, I don't think he accepts gay people. I don't think in terms of their obviously he doesn't accept marriage equality, and I think that that's foreign to him. I think a number of things about the way that society has evolved don't really fit with the worldview that he grew up with, that he's comfortable with. And so that 1950s line, that resonated for me. So I don't know.
And of course, there's also just the fact that he was also just sort of making up the narrative, too. I mean, that it really wasn't actually true that he asked for the resumes in those binders, and we could go on and on. But the important thing, I guess, if there's news that we're looking at right now as we go to tape, is that the polls seem to be breaking a little bit. That there seems to be maybe some movement toward Obama.
I think that these polls are going to just vibrate around the midpoint for a while, because it depends on who you ask, who they're sampling, and the organization that's taking them. I think that the guy at the New York Times, the Nate Silver, who follows
America's boyfriend, as you call him.
No, I don't call him that. Megan, my associate editor, calls him that. But no, he's. I think he's still looking at the battleground states, looking at the lay of the land, still gives Obama something like a 60 to 70% chance of winning. I don't know, Just was it last week where you were convinced that Obama was going to lose, or was that 2 weeks ago? I can't remember.
I was not the one. I didn't say that. I just said all I said was, and I've been taking so much grief for this. All I said, and I think this is an accurate portrayal of what I said, is that if it happens that on the morning of the election you're waking up and saying to yourself, President Romney, you will have to say that it all fell apart last night on that first debate. Okay. That's all I said, which is something that you've also said.
Yeah, I have said that. Yeah.
Anyway, so should we change subject as we do a change of subject?
Yes, let's do that.
I spent the evening last night up in Logan Square with a bunch of people who were talking about an elected school board, something which, by the way, may I say, CAN TV put on television live and also streamed live to the internet. So it's like a big day for CAN TV, the beginning of something new that I hope you're going to see a lot more of, and I hope you'll start watching these things because it's really cool to be kind of engaged in this civic process. But anyway, a bunch of people up there, including Karen Lewis, talking about elected school board. And you'd have to say that these are folks who are just truly tilting against windmills. I mean, I just cannot imagine that this will ever come to pass. But it was fascinating to be in the company of a couple of hundred people who are really animated and talking to people who are saying that these things are happening all over the city, particularly on the south side where aldermen are kind of like running for cover because they don't want to deal with this. But some of the state reps, like State Rep Ford and others, are actually holding hearings, especially in the African American community. And we're seeing, I don't know how to describe it, but certainly a real interest in trying to figure out some other way to do the board than the way we're doing it right now.
Not an interest on the part of the city council, though.
No, well, but I guess they have nothing to do with
our
this,
progressive friend Alderman Joe Moore made
Right,
sure that it
right.
didn't get to the council floor to talk about. I mean, the alderman.
Our progressive mayor doesn't want it either.
They do not want this. Now I'm agnostic on this. I'd like to hear what Kyra has to say about it. I can see really both sides of this argument. I can see when you put politics into school board elections in a city as big as Chicago, where the stakes are so high, you're going to get money coming in all over the place. It's going to be like these ugly campaigns. Do we really want that? On the other hand, this appointed school board thing it's undemocratic. So,
yeah, I would say, I grew up in a family. My mother was a teacher for 30 years. So, I certainly understand the impact that the board can have.
So she was sucking off the public and just kind of
what?
destroying
Nobody
America
talks
all
about
those years?
Tony Kyles like that in my presence. She was most certainly not, but she was an excellent teacher, very, very dedicated to the community. But I think that is an important component, is I do believe that the board should reflect in some ways the community that it claims to represent, because I think that there's more skin in the game that way.
Right.
I think you can certainly point at, if you're looking at the majority of the country doing this in a different way, you might want to explore that notion, because clearly what's going on isn't exactly working. So it certainly should not be beyond reproach that this would be something that would be explored. But to Eric's point, I can also see how that could go the Chicago way, which is not going to help things, as a matter of fact.
Well, I mean, and the other, the argument against the school board is kind of a two-pronged thing. First of all, that Karl Rove is already opening his desk drawer to pull out the money for the super PAC to start, that. But the other side of it is that after a while, maybe the interest would wane, and then Joe Barrios or his successor will pick the school board.
well,
the way they pick all the judges.
It could end up like the judicial races too. I want to be clear with that. What Joe Moore and what the mayor didn't want was they didn't want this put to the voters in advisory referendums.
Right.
I think that to my mind, that should be done. I mean, I can say I'm not sure how I would vote on that, but I do think that this is something that the people of the city of Chicago ought to be able to have a voice on, ought to vote on whether they want that or not. And not allowing that is really, I think, inexcusable.
Well, it's interesting because, again, correct me, I'm going to go off the tracks here a little bit, but the vehicle that allowed Richard M. Daley to become the emperor of schools was when the state legislature changed the law allowing him to appoint the school board. Is that not correct?
I think that's back, was it 94, 95?
Yeah, whenever that was. But I mean, prior to that, the mayor didn't have control of the schools because he couldn't actually appoint the school board. The moment he could appoint the school board, there was no stopping this thing. So what these folks are saying is you have to go to that, you have to go back in time to that point and hit the rewind button and say, okay, we're going to stop that now, and the mayor won't have the ability to appoint. I can certainly see their view because to a lot of people, the process has been really corrupted with this particular school board. But as you point out, it opens up a whole bunch of other.
Well, I would like to know also how this works in other are there other large urban areas that have elected school boards? How has that been working? Are they seeing better results? Are they seeing better relations between the board and the teachers? Are they seeing better educational outcomes? Or is this just one more piece of junk mail in our mailbox every day about vote for me?
Somewhere in our junk pile here we have your august newspaper today. An interesting story about Barbara Byrd Bennett, and that she was the superintendent in Cleveland for some years, 5-6 years, And I had no idea that Cleveland is as far ahead as they are in the development of charter schools, but it doesn't appear to be working out all that well after all these years.
Right. I think one thing that came to light during the strike discussions and debates is that it's not purely an issue of just starting a new system. I think that the charter schools certainly allow some flexibility. I like the fact that there are some schools that have a point of view, so to speak, like they focus maybe on young African American boys, like helping them with leadership issues.
Right,
There's a school near where I grew up on the south side where they teach French, Swahili, different languages. So I think that the feeling is that charter schools are more flexible, but the data on them, because it's difficult to make that apples to apples comparison, is still sketchy. So it's certainly interesting to find that it isn't. I think most people think of it as a slam dunk. The minute you get rid of all of these restrictions, learning can just grow unfettered, and we're seeing that is not necessarily the case. So I wonder if that effect will, if knowing this and having this publicized this way, will cause them to proceed in a more cautious way when it pertains to just opening the floodgates for charter schools and shuttering Chicago public schools.
There has been some reporting on the idea that Rahm Emanuel, at various times, right before he became mayor or after he became mayor, in some private conversations expressed the general view, and I'm not attempting to quote him here, but the mood of this is that, look, the Chicago public school system is just completely and totally screwed up. And we've got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids that we've got to try to somehow rescue. So we got to do triage. And the triage we're going to do is we're going to just let some of them go. We're going to just give up, and we're going to go into the poorer communities and pluck out the kids whose parents want them to be more engaged. We're going to just forget about the public school system altogether. We're going to bring in rich people to build schools to focus on the kids that we can save, and the other ones are just going to stay in this rotting school system, and we're going to give it less and less resources, and we don't care. I mean, Rahm Emanuel would not agree that he had said that if he were sitting here, but that seems to be the thing.
Karen Lewis basically tells that story, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that her version of it?
She has, yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that charter schools as laboratories, which is how I always understood the idea, was that you would say, okay, does it help to teach kids French and Swahili, or does it help to do these leadership academies? And then you take these successful ideas and you incorporate them into public education.
Like a startup of sorts.
Like a startup, like a demonstration project where you don't want to say, okay, every school's got to teach Swahili. You say, well, let's try it here. And or making these local public schools more flexible in terms of what they can do, making them more charter-like in terms of being able to be responsive to new ideas and so on. This idea, and we saw it in the Wednesday Tribune there, that charters are the automatic answer to educational woes is not borne out. That when you take apples to apples kind of comparisons, when you compare schools with similar student populations, charters, as I understand it from this story and other things that I've read, do not overperform and in some cases underperform, and they're doing so outside of the scrutiny and oversight of a large school board and administrative officials. So that becomes worrisome. And I understand the teachers union's position on this too, which is they feel like they want to hire young, energetic teachers that burn them out, don't pay them that much, then they move on.
Right.
And that
kind of like you're running Staples or something.
It deprofessionalizes the profession and so on. So it's. I think that this headlong rush toward charters, it needs to be. You need a lot of people who are saying, wait a minute. And I don't see that necessarily.
Well, you bring up something that I think is just so critical in this conversation, and this is a grotesque comparison, and I apologize for it. I apologize before I say this, but. The city's doing a very interesting thing with the recycling program, where they're like pulling some money out of streets and sanitation and saying, okay, we're going to toss this to the private sector.
See if they can do.
We're going to see what
job.
you guys can do over here, right? And in fact, when they did that, lo and behold, streets and sanitation workers said, oh, we could probably do a little cheaper too, right?
Right.
So that seems to me to be the role that charter schools really can play. They can say, no, you really can do some good things in the inner city, or you could do some things in other parts of the city that you're not doing now. We want to show you how it's done, and then the whole system learns from that. But that's not what we're seeing now. I don't.
No, I think I think that the plan is. I mean, if you look at the chart that we ran in the paper today, you see that New Orleans has something like 79% of schools there are charter. I have heard, that things are not all sunshine and puppies in the school system in New Orleans. Also, that they're having their problems, and it's not. This is not a panacea. This is not something that's going to fix education woes, and that it leads the way toward for-profit companies coming in and turning education into a private enterprise. And I think that you do have to worry about kids who are, like say your parents don't care, right? I mean, say you're living in a bad neighborhood and your parents don't care about education. So then the city just writes you off and doesn't try to improve your school.
That's the part that really bugs me.
I think that's an important facet to look at. Is you have to look at the community in which the schools are located. You have to look at the other factors that are maybe mitigating some of the education. If you have kids that are worried about getting home without being shot, there's going to be a much different focus for them education-wise than there is in a school that might have more affluence and resources. So I don't think that you can just say, okay, if I plop a charter school down in this same disadvantaged community, things will be revolutionized. I think there's parental involvement that has to be looked at as well as the infrastructure of the school, the resources that they have. All those things have to be taken into consideration, and it doesn't have to be a charter school for that to happen.
You just said a kid worrying about getting shot. We were talking a little bit before we went on about this 2020 thing.
Wow, well, I saw a 2020 piece. Diane Sawyer came all the way down from the lofty lofts here to Chicago to do a story about Chicago violence, and it ended with, she basically set up a summit. Father Pfleger was involved, and they brought in gang leaders from all over the city to ask them if anything at all could be done about violence.
Where did they do it at St. Sabina?
I believe they did, yes. And they also talked to children who had been impacted by violence, like a little boy whose grandmother had been shot just standing outside. So she was trying to kind of point the lens at Chicago and try to come up with solutions. And the really sad thing was some of the things that the gang leaders were saying. They all came into the same room, which is definitely a big step in the right direction, but most of them were saying they could not think of a single way to fix the way things have gotten. And one of them said that in Chicago you have one choice: you're either prey or a predator. And I just thought it was interesting that the nation is kind of just, looking at Chicago. She did try to preface it by saying, Chicago is a wonderful place.
It's a beautiful lakefront.
It's a beautiful lakefront and just nice shrubbery downtown. But it really did look like a piece on Afghanistan. The way, you go down into the enemy trenches and you get the warlords together and you try to broker peace. It was depressing, I have to say, as a lifelong Chicagoan. I found it
where are you on this notion that McCarthy and others have advanced, that it's not really gang warfare anymore, that it's kind of individual,
like little feudal,
right? Like the remnants of the gangs are feuding with each other, and some of it's just personal stuff. They're fighting over girls. And that kind of stuff. I've
definitely heard that. I've spoken. I used to cover hip hop for the Chicago Tribune Red Eye prior to joining Jet, and I did speak with someone within the hip hop community who had actually been involved in a gang, and what he said was putting away the OGs or the gang leaders who had some kind of a moral code in jail, kind of unleashed the furies upon the streets. I think gun control is another important issue. A 13-year-old, a 14-year-old get their hands on, a semi-automatic weapon. They said things like, if they see a tweet that angers them, they're going to find that person that sent that tweet right then. And they asked, well, do you think if you waited an hour, you would still take this course of action? And the response was, you don't have an hour. Here, you just have to act.
Well, that was one of the things that was fascinating to me in the coverage of this 2020 thing, was the role of social media in throwing gasoline onto some of these feuds. I guess the groups are called cliques now. They're these little sub-gangs, are cliques is how I've heard McCarthy refer to them. And that when they're, it's like instant graffiti, insulting you, and instant retaliation. And this was the case of the young rapper who was just killed, shot riding
a bike. And he was
was
taunting someone else on YouTube.
And he had done a music video that was dissing Chief Keef or something.
Exactly.
Like that. And this whole thing. And
but all focused on as well.
But all this stuff has been exacerbated by social media.
Well, and also the fact that Chief Keef can become the kind of star that he is, who is just a kid in a Chicago public high school, but he's got a couple million hits on his YouTube channel because he's got the ability, without having even a record contract.
Well, now he
or
has
anything
one.
to what he
Yeah.
has now.
Right,
But
as
I mean,
a result of that
yeah.
popularity.
I mean, I think that was really an interesting point that, you know,
Yeah.
we spent a lot of time talking about how social media kind of fueled the Arab Spring, but
Exactly.
it also can have this kind of an effect on a
Right,
on
it can
a
definitely
old city.
have a negative effect. Remember the flash mobs that were springing up, I think
Yeah.
it was last summer, where people were organizing to beat people up and rob people.
right.
So it goes beyond gang activity. You know, in some cases it's just the London uprising, social media played a strong role in that.
Right.
But yeah, that was a very interesting point that was raised during the mini documentary, but she did a series on it. So apparently there is more to find out.
And in 5 seconds, what's the answer to this problem?
There was no answer.
I find these
Believe
things so
me.
depressing.
I
It
know
is
that's why
depressing.
these conversations are just so
Yeah.
almost pointless, because you do get to this point where it's like, well, okay, so they didn't have any solutions for Diane
You know,
Sawyer.
they
Diane
didn't-
Sawyer
they didn't
thought
have
she
any
was going to solve it,
solutions.
but
no,
she didn't.
you know, bringing them
So,
together for a basketball game was a nice start.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
made for feel-good TV.
I'm optimistic, and I haven't lost all my optimism for ceasefire, which I guess now is called Prevent Violence. They've changed their name.
Right. Did a
But
little
but
I missed that.
restructuring.
but you know, that basic idea that Gary Slutkin and those and Theo Hardeman and those
Yeah,
guys,
yeah.
that does seem like that shows some promise. Now, you know, you
I
get
think
debates
it's
on
part of
that,
it.
but-
I think you definitely have to, like I have some colleagues who are doing more one-on-one youth mentoring, trying to reach children earlier when you can actually change their minds, not trying to get to the point where you're standing in
Right.
between two armed, you know, individuals, because that's probably the more extreme end. It clearly it works, but
Yeah.
that's the extreme end. You want to get in there early. But of course, there's financial, economic considerations that have to do with this as well. It's not just you know, angry people going after each
Jobs and
other.
education
Jobs,
should be
education,
part of it.
exactly.
We always try to like hold the last minute or so for some wild card discussion, and I thought it would be perfect to talk to a guy who works for a newspaper that's going behind a paywall, at least partially, and someone who's working for a magazine that obviously has to completely reinvent itself in the new world. What about paywalls? Do they work? Could Johnson Publishing ever consider something like that?
You know, I think that paywalls can be effective. I believe with the New York Times, we've seen where people are willing to pay for quality, willing to pay for something, especially if what you're getting online is worth it. Now, if you're merely reprinting it, you know, on a screen, that might not be something that people will go for, but the charticles, graphics, interactive video, those types of things. So I definitely see some promise there, just like Spotify and some of the social media where you can have it free, but premium, you get additional benefits, and people will do that. I think you could see the same thing. I don't think that it would restore journalism to its former lofty heights, but I think it is one promising avenue if you have the goods, as they say.
Did you just say charticles?
Yes, I did. I love the word charticles.
That's a new one on me.
It's new?
I've never heard of charticles. I mean, I
You've been
immediately
too busy
understand what
studying football.
Yeah, I
analogies
know.
to get this.
So what about Newsweek going under? Does anybody care? Will anybody notice that it disappeared?
Well, I will, because I subscribe to Newsweek. I'm the last of the true subscribers of print publications. You know, I agree with just about everything Kyra said. It's one of these things where, you know, although information does want to be free, unfortunately, rent doesn't want to be free.
Right.
Groceries don't want to be free.
And we don't want to work for free, right?
Well, we can't.
We don't.
You know?
We can't.
And the truth is that a lot of this free media, a lot of these things that people say, oh, look at you, all the Huffington Post, and they give it away. That so much of what is done on those sites either comes directly from or is inspired by, generated from the people who are paid money to go out and do the reporting.
Aggregated.
And I think people understand that, and I think we're certainly hoping that we'll find the right price point and find the right revenue model. And Kyra's right; we're never going to be the big fat Chicago Tribune that's had people all in far-flung bureaus.
But that
all over
doesn't
the
matter
world.
as long as the journalism survives. That's the
Well,
thing that we care about.
and I'm optimistic about that. Maybe on multi-platform.
Yeah.
So.
So another one we didn't solve.
With that, well, I think we came closer to solving.
Right. I
this
think
than
we got a
did
lot
the violence.
closer than Diane Sawyer
Closer to
got.
solving journalism
Right.
than we are to
Let's
solving
call a
violence in
summit.
Chicago. Yeah. Let's
Diane
have
Sawyer will
We'll
figure
play
this
ping
out.
pong
We'll call
afterwards.
Diane.
Right.
She'll have us all meet her.
She likes Chicago.
Thank you, Kyra. Welcome to the show. Glad to have you here. I hope you'll come back again. Lots and
Definitely.
lots of times. And same lane with Eric, of course. Eric Zorn from the Chicago Tribune, Kyra Kyles from Jet Magazine. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom as you always do. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can find us right here on CAN TV, but you also know about this little address right here. That means that that's the place you can go to watch us any old time you want, and you can also subscribe on the podcast, to listen to us, all that stuff.
I recommend that.
Eric recommends it, so you should do it. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week here on Chicago Newsroom. Thanks for watching. Bye.